So it's time to start talking about the different settings on the camera, how to adjust them, and a little bit about what they do, but I'll have some more resources for those things, some better visuals. We'll really just talk about operating the camera in this video. So the three major settings on the camera are your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO. Those are represented on the back of the camera in these specific places. So let me turn it back on. Hello. If your display does go off, by the way, you just half press the shutter release button again, it'll pop back on. So that first number with the fraction, that is your shutter speed. That measures the time that your camera's shutter is open, letting light in. So it's basically closed all the time until you're ready to take a photo. You click the shutter release button, releases the shutter or opens the shutter, however you want to visualize it. It opens the shutter, lets light in, which hits the image sensor, which is recording light, making your photo. And then when the time is up for what you've set, your setting, it closes again. So it's closed, it's closed, it's closed. You click the button, it opens, lets light in, records your photo. And then when the time is up, it shuts. That amount of time is really fast. And that's why this is a fraction. It's measured in fractions of a second. So 1 slash or over 125 means this is set to 1/125th of a second. So if you cut a second into 125 pieces, this setting would be open for one of those pieces. So you can hear what that sounds like real quick. I'm going to press the button to take a photo. Pretty quick, right? If I change that setting by rolling what's called the main dial. So it's, let me try and get a good angle here. On top of your camera, the main dial is this dial right here above your mode dial. That's the main dial. So it's under your shutter release button. So if I roll that, see that setting change? That's changing your shutter speed. So I'm going to go to a really slow shutter speed, and I want you to hear how slow it sounds. I'm going to go to a whole second. That's the one with the quote marks next to it. So listen to what that sounds like. So you saw that light come on. You heard it go like click, and then waited a second, and then clicked again. That was the shutter opening, staying open for a second, and closing. So I'm going to do it one more time. Listen in. So that was a second. I'm going to make the shutter speed fast again so you can hear one more time what that sounds like. Let me go to the fastest one I can find. The fastest this camera goes is 1/4000th of a second. We'll talk about what that does to your photos in a little bit. So listen in. Super fast, right? So that's how to change your shutter speed. Like I said, we'll dive into what your shutter speed actually does for your photos in more resources next. So let's also talk about how to change your aperture setting. Your aperture or your f-stop, those are used interchangeably, those terms. That's the next one over, and it always starts with an F. That's why it's called an f-stop. So shutter speed is fractions of a second. F-stop has the F in front of it. That controls your aperture opening size. So just like how the eye, there's the black part inside your pupil, the colorful part is the iris. The iris actually like pulls open and closed your pupil. So the aperture of the camera is a lot like the iris of the eye, or the pupil of the eye, which is the opening. And then technically the diaphragm is the iris. So that's the part of the camera that pulls open your pupil. But I won't go too far into anatomy. Just know that it's similar to the eye. The aperture opening is like the pupil of your eye being pulled open by the iris, or on the camera, the diaphragm. So this number, f5.6, is controlling the size of that. So if to change the aperture, by the way, you've got to hold down AV with your thumb. So you'll see there's a little, trying to get the angle right. right there, that little guy. You're going to want to hold down AV and you'll see those little orange things shift from your shutter speed to your aperture. Then you can use the main dial to rotate and that setting will change. Okay, so I'm going to roll all the way in one direction and I'm going to see the smallest number of f-stop I can get is f4.5. What that translates to in the size of your opening, the smaller the number, so 4.5 is a relatively small number, that means the opening is wider. So it's an inverse relationship, meaning opposites, to the size of the aperture opening. Actually, should have been doing this the whole time. A little small opening is a large number, like f36. Comparatively, that's a large number. A large aperture opening is something like f1.8. So check out on the camera what the range of different f-stop settings you can get. What's the lowest that these lenses and these cameras go, so they kind of pair together. If you had a different lens, you could maybe get a smaller number than what we can get right now with this lens on this camera. The smallest I can get right now is f4.5. The smallest number, meaning the biggest opening I can get. The highest number f-stop I can get, meaning the smallest opening, is f29 for me right now. So the highest I can get, f29. That means, again, the smallest opening. We will talk about the lens more in just a second, but if you want to start by grabbing the grippy part, this part, this part of the lens, and adjusting it, see if you can get any different settings. So when I'm zoomed all the way out, like this, not like that. So when I'm all the way clockwise, the smallest f number I can get is f3.5. So that actually changes. It's a variable aperture or variable f-stop, which means you get different settings depending on how zoomed in or out you are on the lens. If I zoom all the way in, the lowest I can go is f5.6. And I don't know if you probably can't see how zoomed in or not I am through the lens there. But just know that that changes. So experiment 2 with the highest number f-stop you can get. When I'm zoomed all the way in, the highest I can get is f36. When I zoom out, let me make sure I'm at the edge there. The highest I can get when I'm zoomed out is f22. So again, that changes depending on how zoomed in or out you are. And what those numbers do, again, we'll talk about in a little bit. But I just want you to know how to change them first. So your shutter speed, fraction of a second, your f-stop or aperture, they're interchangeable. Always starts with an F. You have to hold down AV before you can change that one. ISO usually is set to auto, and usually that's fine. There will be times we need to take over the control of that one. For those times, on this little circle wheel here, you want to click the top one. You'll see it's labeled ISO. So click on that. You'll get these options. So auto is the first one. The next one up from auto, the lowest ISO you can get is 100. So ISO controls the sensitivity to light. I won't go too much into it now. Again, this is just a demo on how to physically use and control the settings on the camera, not exactly what they do. But for our purposes in class, when you do need to change the ISO, it'll usually be to turn the ISO down so the camera doesn't try and compensate when we're shooting in the dark, for instance, like light painting. So again, this is how you would do that. Click the up button, choose the setting that you want, click OK. And then when you go back to the settings screen, you'll see that now the ISO is not on auto, it's on whatever you set it to. So those are really the major settings that you need to know about. Really quick, I'm going to show you what resetting these to default looks like because we've set all kinds of wacky settings. I'm going to one more time go to menu, the third yellow wrench, click set, clear all camera settings, click OK. And then when I go back to my main screen, you'll see it's back to what the default settings are. So shutter speed of 1/125, f-stop 5.6, and ISO set to auto.